Two of the most elite special operations units ever assembled, both capable of executing missions that would destroy ordinary soldiers, both trained to survive where others perish. But when you take away the helicopters, the satellite communications, the extraction teams, and drop them into the empty quarter with nothing but basic survival gear and a 120-kilometer march to the extraction point, something fascinating happens. One Unit S training reveals a truth so fundamental that it exposes a critical gap in modern special operations doctrine. And I need to tell you right now, the reason only one team made it to that extraction point had nothing to do with physical toughness. It had nothing to do with willpower. It was something their grandfathers understood. Something that's been slowly forgotten in the age of technology and air-conditioned forward operating bases. Before you assume you know which unit walked out of that desert, I want you to understand that the unit that failed made decisions that would look absolutely correct on paper. The Rub al Khali, the empty quarter, southeastern Arabian Peninsula, the largest contiguous sand desert on Earth. Summer temperatures exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Surface sand temperature can reach 80 degrees. Annual rainfall in some areas is literally zero. This is where the scenario takes place, and this is where special operations doctrine gets tested against 10,000 years of human survival knowledge. Let me tell you about the two units we're comparing because their histories reveal everything about what happens next. U.S. Army Delta Force. Officially the first Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta was founded in 1977 by Colonel Charles Beckwith. What most people don't know is that Beckwith spent a year on exchange with the British SAS and came back determined to create an American equivalent. Delta selection has an estimated pass rate of around 10%. These are the most elite operators the American military produces. They are selected for intelligence, physical capability, maturity, and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. They are exceptional at what they do. Now here's what makes this comparison so interesting. The British Special Air Service wasn't founded in a training facility. It wasn't conceived in a Pentagon planning room. The SAS was born in the North African desert in 1941, created by David Stirling specifically to operate behind Rommel's lines in conditions that would kill ordinary soldiers. The founding members of the SAS didn't learn desert warfare as a training module. They learned it because failure meant death. They operated from the Libyan desert, worked alongside the long-range desert group, and developed doctrine that came directly from Bedouin guides who had survived in these environments for generations. The SAS didn't adapt to the desert. The SAS was created by the desert. This distinction matters more than any equipment comparison, more than any fitness test, more than any selection statistics. Because when you put both units in an extreme desert survival scenario, you're not just testing current operators. You're retesting 80 years of accumulated institutional knowledge against 50 years of training. Programs built for different environments. The scenario is this. Joint Special Operations exercise in Oman. Both teams inserted by helicopter into the empty quarter, 120 kilometers from the extraction point. Standard survival loadout. No GPS, no satellite phones, limited water. Navigation by map, compass, and stars. The exercise is designed to test extended desert survival and navigation. And within the first 6 hours, the fundamental differences between these two approaches become obvious in ways that will determine who makes it out. Most people think the desert kills you with heat. That's partially true, but it's an incomplete understanding. The desert kills you through water loss. An operator working in 45-degree heat loses approximately 1 liter of water per hour through perspiration alone. In extreme heat, this can exceed 2 liters. You carry maybe 8 to 10 liters, maximum, without compromising mobility. Do the math. You have perhaps 10 hours of water if you're moving during the day. That's not enough to cover 120 kilometers. This calculation shapes everything that happens next, and it's where the first critical difference emerges. The Delta team begins movement at 0500, just before dawn. This seems logical. Start early, cover ground before the worst heat, rest during midday, continue in late afternoon. This is standard military doctrine for hot environments. It's what they've trained to do. It appears reasonable. But there's a problem with this approach that becomes apparent within hours. The SAS team does something that would look like laziness to an untrained observer. They rest during the early morning hours, when Delta is moving out. They're preparing for movement, but they're not moving yet. They won't begin their march until after sunset. They plan to travel primarily at night and rest during the day under improvised shade. Here's why this matters, and I need you to understand the physiology because it explains everything. During daylight desert operations, you lose water through two mechanisms: perspiration from exertion and perspiration from heat. You can control the first by moving slowly, but you cannot control the second. Even lying perfectly still in 45-degree heat, you're losing significant water just trying to cool your body. At night, the temperature drops dramatically, often to 20 degrees or lower. your body's cooling requirements plummet. The same physical exertion that cost you 2 liters per hour during the day might cost you half a liter at night. You've just doubled or tripled your effective water supply by changing when you move. The Bedouin have known this for thousands of years. The SAS learned it from them in 1941, and it became part of their institutional DNA. Night movement, daytime rest. It seems obvious when you explain it, but military doctrine often prioritizes daylight operations for command and control, for accurate navigation, for maintaining formation. The SAS training emphasized adapting operational tempo to the environment. Remember this moment, because in about 30 hours, every kilometer of that lead becomes a liability. Let me talk about equipment because this is where the American approach shows both its strengths and its critical vulnerability. The Delta operators arrive with the finest gear American military procurement can provide. Advanced hydration systems, electrolyte supplements, reflective tarps, cooling technologies. Some of this equipment is genuinely excellent, but there's an underlying assumption built into this equipment loadout that becomes problematic. The assumption is that someone is coming to get you relatively soon. The SAS equipment looks almost primitive by comparison. Traditional Arab-style head covering. Loose, light-colored natural fiber clothing. Simple canvas for shade construction. The assumption that no one is coming, the assumption that you might be out here for a week, the assumption that your equipment needs to work when there's nothing to repair it with and no resupply coming. The philosophy is self-sufficiency rather than optimization. Hour 12. The sun is now at full intensity. Delta has found shade and established a rest position. They've covered approximately 28 kilometers. Excellent progress. But something is beginning to happen that won't become critical for another 18 hours. Their electrolyte supplements are working as designed, but their water consumption has exceeded planning parameters. They've used more water than the doctrine predicted because the doctrine was developed in training environments, not in the empty quarter in midsummer. The training environments were hot. This is hotter. The difference matters. The SAS team spends the day in minimal activity under their improvised shade. They sleep in shifts, they don't move. They drink small amounts of water regularly, never allowing thirst to develop because thirst is a trailing indicator. By the time you're thirsty, you're already behind on hydration. They've covered 0 kilometers today. Their water consumption has been minimal. If you're scoring this as a race, they appear to be losing badly. They're not racing, they're surviving. And this is the fundamental philosophical difference I need you to understand. American special operations culture, shaped by decades of kinetic operations in multiple theaters, emphasizes mission accomplishment above all else. Get to the objective, complete the task. Physical and mental toughness overcome obstacles. This approach works brilliantly in the vast majority of scenarios. When you have helicopter extraction on call, when you have medical support, when you have the most powerful military logistics system in human history backing you up, aggressive forward movement is absolutely the right approach. But the SAS approach comes from a different history. It comes from operating in North Africa with no backup. It comes from the long-range desert group penetrating hundreds of miles behind enemy lines with no possibility of extraction if things went wrong. It comes from an institutional memory that says sometimes the mission is simply getting everyone home alive, and everything else is secondary to that. The desert doesn't care about your timeline. The desert doesn't care about your objectives. The desert kills soldiers who forget this. Hour 20. Night has fallen again. Temperature has dropped to 23 degrees. The SAS team begins moving. They navigate by stars, using techniques that would be familiar to Bedouin traders from 500 years ago. Polaris for north, the arc of the Southern Cross for orientation. The movement of specific stars across the sky as a clock. This navigation is slower than GPS. It requires skills that must be practiced regularly. But it cannot fail. The stars don't need batteries. The constellations don't malfunction. Delta begins their night movement as well. They're covering ground effectively. Their pace is good, but they're now operating on a hydration deficit that's beginning to affect decision-making. Nothing dramatic yet. No one is collapsing, but the calculations are getting slightly off. The navigation checks are taking slightly longer. This is the insidious nature of dehydration. It degrades performance gradually, almost imperceptibly, until suddenly you're making critical errors without realizing it. Hour 30. This is where the story changes. The SAS team has covered approximately 45 kilometers, all of it during cool night hours. Their water consumption has been minimal. They have significant reserves remaining. Their pace has been steady and sustainable. Delta has covered approximately 52 kilometers. They appear to still be in the lead, but they've now consumed over 70% of their water supply. They need to cover another 68 kilometers. The math no longer works. Something has to change. The Delta team leader recognizes the situation. He's a professional. He's experienced. He makes a tactically sound decision. Increase pace during the cooler morning hours to cover maximum ground before the heat, then reassess at the next rest point. This seems reasonable. Push harder now, while conditions are relatively favorable. This is how Delta operators are trained to think. When facing adversity, apply more effort, more aggression, more physical output. This works in almost every scenario. In the desert, it's exactly wrong. Increasing physical output means increasing water consumption. They're already in deficit. Pushing harder makes the deficit worse. And here's what nobody tells you about desert survival that the Bedouin understand intuitively. There's a point of no return. A point where you've lost so much water that you cannot recover, even if you find a water source. Your body begins shutting down systems to conserve the remaining fluid. Your digestion stops working. Your kidneys begin to fail. You can drink water and your body can no longer process it effectively. The Delta team is approaching this threshold. The SAS team is nowhere near it. Hour 36, the crisis point. Delta has now covered 75 kilometers. Remarkable physical achievement. But 3 team members are showing signs of serious heat injury, confusion, cessation of sweating, rapid pulse. These are the warning signs every survival instructor teaches. But by the time these signs appear, you're already in medical emergency territory. The team is forced to stop. They're 45 kilometers from extraction. They have less than 2 liters of water per man. They cannot continue. The team leader makes the call that every professional operator dreads. Emergency extraction requests, and I want to be absolutely clear about this. This is not a failure of courage. These are some of the most physically tough humans on Earth. This is not a failure of training. They followed their doctrine correctly. This is a failure of doctrine meeting environment. Their training prepared them for hot environments with available support. It did not prepare them for extended, unsupported desert survival. The distinction seems subtle until you reach 45 kilometers from anywhere with 3 men going down from heat casualties. The SAS team reaches the extraction point at hour 52. All members ambulatory. Water reserves remaining. No casualties. When they're debriefed, their patrol report reads like something from a different exercise entirely. Slow, steady, night movement. Aggressive daytime rest, discipline. Constant water, conservation awareness. No heroics, no physical domination of the environment. Just patient, methodical survival doctrine applied correctly. And here is where I have to tell you something that might surprise you about why this difference exists. It's not because Delta operators are less capable. By any individual measure, Delta operators are among the finest soldiers ever produced. It's because of institutional history and strategic reality. The SAS has maintained desert warfare as a core capability since 1941. They've trained in Oman, in Jordan, in various Gulf states, continuously for over 8 decades. Desert operations aren't something they learn. Desert operations are part of how the unit defines itself. The regiment's founding mythology is desert-based. Their cap badge still features the winged dagger designed in the Libyan sand. Every new operator absorbs this history, this culture, this understanding that the desert is where the SAS was born. American special operations developed along a different trajectory. Vietnam emphasized jungle warfare. The 1980s and 1990s focused on counterterrorism and direct action. Iraq and Afghanistan operations, while occurring in hot environments, featured robust logistics, forward operating bases with climate control, helicopter support, and medical evacuation capabilities that could reach casualties within the golden hour. American operators became extraordinarily skilled at high-tempo operations supported by the most sophisticated military logistics system in human history. They became less skilled at the thing the SAS learned in 1941. Surviving without any of that, this doesn't mean Delta is inferior. In a direct action raid, in a hostage rescue, in the high-tempo kinetic operations that have defined the war on terror, Delta's capabilities are unmatched. But every unit has a specialty shaped by its history. And in extended desert survival, the SAS has 80 years of continuous institutional knowledge that simply cannot be replicated in a training course. Let me tell you about the deeper lesson here because it applies far beyond military operations. There's a difference between training for an environment and having that environment in your blood. The Bedouin don't think about desert survival as a skill. It's simply how they lived. The SAS, through decades of continuous commitment, has approached something similar. Desert thinking is embedded in how they plan, how they move, how they equip themselves. It's not a capability they switch on. It's always there. Modern militaries face a constant tension between specialization and generalization. Do you create operators who are good at everything, or do you create specialists who are exceptional in specific environments? The American approach has generally favored versatile operators who can be deployed anywhere. The British approach has maintained specific environmental specialists within their Tier 1 units. Neither approach is wrong. But when you pit a versatile generalist against an environmental specialist in that specialist's home terrain, the outcome is predictable. What makes this scenario educational rather than simply competitive is what happens afterward. American Special Operations has recognized this gap. Since 2015, there's been increased emphasis on extended survival training. Exchange programs with British and Australian SAS units have expanded. The doctrine is evolving. The hard lessons learned in exercises like this one filter back into training programs. And this is exactly how professional militaries improve. Not through denying capability gaps, but through honestly assessing them and learning from partners who have different strengths. The SAS team that walked out of that desert didn't celebrate defeating their American counterparts. They debriefed with them. They shared techniques. They explained the thinking behind night movement and aggressive rest discipline. Because the SAS operators understand something important. In a real-world scenario, they might be working alongside Delta. They might need Delta's capabilities in an urban environment or a maritime interdiction. Allies make each other stronger. I want you to think about what this scenario reveals about the nature of expertise. The Delta operators who requested extraction weren't weak. They were misapplied. Their extraordinary capabilities were designed for a different problem set. It's like criticizing a Formula One car for performing poorly in a rally race. The capabilities are world-class. The application is wrong. The SAS capabilities in this scenario weren't superior in any absolute sense. They were appropriate. Their doctrine matched the environment. Their training matched the challenge. Their institutional history prepared them specifically for this exact situation. That's not universal superiority. That's specialization meeting its intended use case. But here's the uncomfortable truth that military planners have to grapple with. You cannot predict where the next conflict will occur. You cannot know if your operators will need to survive in Arctic conditions or desert conditions or jungle conditions. The American solution has been to create versatile operators and trust that they can adapt. The British solution has been to maintain specialist capabilities within their units. Both approaches have costs. Versatility means you're never optimal for any specific environment. Specialization means capability gaps in environments you haven't prioritized. The modern answer, and this is where the story becomes hopeful, is integration. American and British special operations now train together more frequently than ever before. The exchange programs that created Delta Force in the first place have expanded into comprehensive joint training regimes. American operators now spend time in Oman with SAS desert specialists. British operators train at American facilities for capabilities where the Americans lead. The result is that the best of both approaches gets shared. When you watch this scenario play out, don't think of it as one unit defeating another. Think of it as an educational experience that makes both units stronger. The Delta operators who experienced that moment of crisis, who felt their bodies failing in ways their training hadn't prepared them for. They went back to their units with knowledge that you cannot get from a classroom. They understood at a visceral level why the SAS moves at night, why rest discipline isn't weakness, why sometimes the aggressive approach is wrong. And the SAS operators gained something too. They gained respect for the physical capabilities of their American counterparts, for the technological innovations that American procurement develops, for the aggressive mindset that has made American special operations so effective in so many theaters. Learning flows both ways in a genuine alliance. The desert has been testing human beings for thousands of years. The lessons it teaches are ancient. Move at night, rest during heat. Conserve water relentlessly. Respect the environment rather than trying to dominate it. These lessons were old when the Egyptian pharaohs sent expeditions into the Sinai. They were old when Roman legions struggled in the Mesopotamian summer. They remain true today. What changes is whether military doctrine incorporates these lessons or forgets them in favor of technological solutions. Technology is wonderful. But at 50 degrees Celsius, with no resupply and no extraction, technology is just weight you're carrying. What matters is knowledge. What matters is doctrine. What matters is institutional wisdom accumulated over generations. The SAS made it out of that desert because their institution remembered what the desert requires. Delta requested extraction because their institution, for all its excellence, had prioritized different knowledge. The solution isn't to declare one unit better than the other. The solution is to share knowledge until both units have what they need. And that's exactly what's happening. Every year, the cooperation deepens. Every year, the doctrine evolves. Every year, the hard lessons get incorporated into training. The scenario I've described is valuable precisely because it exposes these gaps. You cannot fix what you don't acknowledge. You cannot improve what you don't examine honestly. So what's the takeaway from this entire comparison? Delta Force remains one of the most formidable special operations units on Earth. In the environments and mission sets they've optimized for, they are virtually unmatched. The SAS, with their specific desert heritage and continuous environmental training, have capabilities that come from 80 years of institutional commitment to specific terrain. Together, working as allies, sharing doctrine and techniques, they become more capable than either would be alone.